Adorama TV presents Getting the Shot with Corey Rich.
Hi, I'm Corey Rich, and you are watching Adorama TV. Adorama.com is the home for anything photo or video related. Today I'm going to talk about trying to create the sense of motion in a still photograph. Years ago I had the opportunity to go to Mallorca, Spain, and photograph one of the legends of rock climbing, Chris Sharma. Chris was really one of the innovators in a subculture of rock climbing, which is deep water soloing, or psycho block as it's called. Now that means climbing without a rope over the ocean, and if you fall into the ocean. The reality is I was in Mallorca to actually try to document Chris really innovating the sport of psycho block, or deep water soloing. I was working with three of my very close friends, Josh Lowell, Brett Lowell, and Peter Mortimer, three documentary filmmakers that were working on a film which was called King Lines, and it was documenting Chris Sharma traveling around the world, really pursuing the most aesthetic, beautiful, most challenging rock climbs on the planet. I was watching the three of them shoot motion, and I became sort of jealous. I realized that in 3 seconds they could really show the progression of what Chris was doing, or the struggle, and you could really see that in the motion footage. But in still photographs, you got just that moment. It was one moment. During the block of time that I was in Mallorca, I started to really think about how could I, in a still photograph, try to create that same feeling of progress, of progression, of motion. So I racked my brain each night, and I came to the conclusion that maybe the way to do it was to shoot a single photograph, a background plate, but then shoot a series of images that would be the sequence of climbing images in the photograph. But I needed the right situation, and finally, near the end of the trip, I found that situation. It was a detached arch, an island separated from the coastline, and it was a 60-foot arch with what turned out to be the hardest deep water solo in the world. It took Chris several years, actually, to finally complete this climb. So on this particular day, Chris had to actually, every day, he would swim out to the island, he would climb up the backside of the island, dry off, put on shoes, put on a chalk bag, and he had several chalk bags. They were all drying out in the sun on the backside of the island, and then he'd traverse under the arch and he would start climbing up the arch. So what I did was I walked out shoulder to shoulder with Brett Lowell, and we set up tripods in the ocean. I was kind of neck deep in the ocean. And it was a Manfrotto tripod, carbon fiber legs with a ball head so that I could quickly adjust to the camera. And I went with a very wide lens, something like a 17 to 35 millimeter lens, so that I could really get the depth in the foreground and have lots of depth of field. Because I was working literally in the water, I mean almost neck deep, and sea spray waves were breaking, hitting the tripod, I was getting sea spray on the lenses. I had Schneider Optics clear filters over the lenses because I didn't want the sea spray actually getting on the glass. I also had lens tissue, which I was using the actual lens tissue where you can individually pull the lens tissue out. That's the best I find for actually cleaning the lens because it really absorbs some of the moisture. I also had a bottle of just lens cleaning fluid, so if I got nailed by some water, I could spray the lens, wipe the lens, spray the lens, wipe the lens. Sometimes it's just that repetitive pattern of kind of over and over going in a circular motion to get salt water off of the lens. The other extreme, if today I were doing this, I would maybe consider, if it were rougher waters, I would probably put the camera in an Aquatech housing just to make sure that if that rogue wave hits, there's a guarantee that I'm not going to have a damaged camera or a ruined camera for that matter. And then what I did is I shot the master plate. I waited for that perfect moment where the light was right, the island looked good, and there was a moment, in fact, when a sailboat cruised past in the background, and so that was my master plate. I shot a few frames, I bracketed, made certain that the water looked good, and then when Chris finally traversed under the arch, I began shooting. Now I'm a sports photographer. Now I started thinking about individual moments. I was looking at body position, I was looking at the shape and how he was separated from the wall. And of course I was exposing for the background. I wanted want Chris to be silhouetted under the arch, and I wanted the highlights to be exposed correctly. So I'm exposing for the highlights. And as Chris is attempting to climb his new route, I'm actually taking pictures along the way. I probably shot 100 photographs of this attempt of Chris trying to climb this particular route, which eventually became Espontas. This was a long time ago when I shot this photograph. I was shooting digitally, but I was probably shooting on a 512 card, not 500 gigabytes, but 512 megabytes. And the files were probably fairly small. But then I had the ability to download those photos onto a laptop. I know this is commonplace today, but then I had the ability to launch Adobe Photoshop, select my background plate, and then start selecting, editing the best pictures of Chris, the best body positions, cutting Chris out and bringing them into the single composition, into the single photograph. And eventually I stitched together an image, which is 10 photographs of Chris from the start of the climb to attempting to do the dyno, falling into the water and the splash of the water. I think what I really walked away with from this experience was the idea that the technology is the great enabler. Digital cameras, computing power that was incredibly fast, an Apple laptop, Adobe Photoshop, sophisticated software that really gives us the freedom to be creative, to realize our creative dreams. So I hope what you take away from this is, one, you have to embrace technology. We live in this amazing time. The sky's the limit. The only limits are what you can dream up. Two, feel lucky that this isn't something you have to do in the darkroom, because quite frankly, I don't think you could make this picture if you were shooting on film and printing in the darkroom. It would be really, really, really difficult. And three, force yourself to get out there and make some interesting pictures, and try to think about those pictures in a new way. Be sure to check out Adorama's latest contest. There's a ton of opportunity to win some pretty darn cool stuff. Thanks for listening. I'm Corey Rich. You're listening to Adorama TV. There's an enormous amount of content just like this that gets published on the Adorama Learning Center. If you haven't subscribed to the Adorama YouTube channel, do so, and I will see you soon.
Great-looking prints at low cost? Be sure to visit our easy-to-use online printing service. Adorama Pix has professionals who treat your images with the utmost care that you can count on. For a quick turnaround on photos, cards, or albums, use AdoramaPix.com.
Adorama TV presents Getting the Shot with Corey Rich.
Hi, I'm Corey Rich, and you are watching Adorama TV. Adorama is the place where I buy all of my equipment for my photography and video needs. Today, in this episode of Getting the Shot, I'm going to talk about why I love backlight. Really, the difference between front light and backlight. In lighting conditions like this, I mean, now it's a fall day in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the sun is actually pretty low in the sky, but still, between about 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., the sun is pretty high in the sky, and when you shoot front lit, it's pretty harsh. There's kind of shadows under the eyes. It's raccoon-style eyes. Really, it's just a washed-out light. It's pretty darn bright. Now, by simply switching positions and pointing your camera in the opposite direction so that the sun is actually behind your subject, it allows you to create a shadow on your subject's face and have controllable light with a nice rim that separates your subject from the background. The other beauty of shooting backlit is that your exposure is consistent. Once you meter for that shadow, that's it doesn't change. So you can see their eyes, you can see detail on the face, you can see detail on the product or the wardrobe that your subject is wearing. And it allows you to really focus on the creative rather than trying to, for example, add strobe or filling the shot using a reflector to get rid of those unpleasant shadows or make the light pop a little more. But you can see it right now on me. I have this nice rim light on my shoulders and my hair, yet my face and my torso It's actually consistent light versus high contrast light with shadows. All of the same rules apply when you're shooting with backlight versus front light. It's still about the moment, the composition, and the light, which of course we're shooting backlit. Now, when I'm metering for backlight, I'm actually just metering through the camera, TTL. I'll shoot for the shadow, I'll check the back of the camera, and once I've locked in that exposure, the beauty is, even if the brightness of the sun goes up or down slightly, it barely affects your shadow. So in this case, where there's some milky clouds with pockets of sun, even in manual exposure while shooting raw, I'm not really concerned about subtle changes in brightness. Whereas when you're shooting front lit, it's critical that you're actually making those subtle adjustments or you're going to have a problem. You can see in this front lit photograph, there's shadows under the eyes, very high contrast, kind of harsh lines. But then you see in the backlit photograph, it's consistent light. There's shadow across the entire body. I can see the eyes, I can see detail in the face, I can see the product if that's what I'm trying to capture. I can actually see it in this photograph. Again, you combine this backlight with shallow depth of field. In this case, I'm shooting somewhere between f4 and 5.6. Really allows me to separate the background from the foreground, and that rim light helps in doing just that. Additionally, it's a lot easier for the talent, or for the athlete in this case, to not be squinting. When you ask them to stare directly into the sun, it's really hard to keep your eyes open. But when you're actually looking into a shadow, it's much easier. I hope what you take away from this segment is that you can shoot from sun up to sundown and really make that midday light work to your advantage by shooting backlit. You're watching Adorama TV. Content like this is published for free on a regular basis. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do, and I'll see you next time. Make sure to check out Adorama's latest contest for your opportunity to win tons of cool stuff.
Do you want great looking prints at low cost? Be sure to visit our easy to use online printing service. Adorama Pix has professionals who treat your